The music stopped first. Not gradually, not awkwardly. It cut, like a throat silenced mid-breath. 100 conversations died with it. Crystal chandeliers trembled faintly overhead, their golden light flickering across a sea of stunned faces. Goblets hovered mid-air. Laughter froze on painted lips. Even the guards lining the marble walls straightened, their instincts snapping into place before their minds could catch up. Because only one person in the entire kingdom could silence a royal gathering without warning. And he had just done it. Boots echoed against polished stone, slow, deliberate, merciless. The Alpha King had risen. A ripple of fear spread through the grand hall like wildfire. Nobles lowered their gazes. Warriors stiffened. No one dared speak. No one dared breathe too loudly. At the center of it all, on the raised obsidian dais, he stood. Tall, unmoving, absolute. His presence didn't demand attention. It owned it. His dark eyes swept across the crowd once, twice, calculating, unreadable. The kind of gaze that didn't just see, it uncovered. And then, he spoke. Step forward. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried, sharp and cold, cutting through the hall like a blade drawn across skin. A pause followed. A dangerous one, because he hadn't said a name. But somehow, everyone knew who he meant. Every head turned. Every eye landed on her. Her heart slammed violently against her ribs. No, not here. Not now. Her fingers tightened around the delicate silver goblet in her hand, the metal trembling just enough to betray her. She forced it still, forced her breathing steady. Act natural. You've done this before. But her legs, traitors, felt rooted to the ground. Must I repeat myself? The Alpha King's voice dropped lower this time, worse, quieter. A warning wrapped in silk, hiding steel underneath. A guard shifted near the columns. Someone in the crowd exhaled sharply. And just like that, she knew. There was no escape. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because running would mean death. And staying might mean something worse. Slowly, carefully, she stepped forward. The sound of her heels against marble echoed far too loudly in the suffocating silence. Each step felt like walking deeper into a trap she had spent weeks avoiding. Eyes burned into her from every direction. Suspicion, curiosity, anticipation. They thought this was punishment. A public unraveling. They thought the Alpha King had finally decided to make an example out of someone foolish enough to cross him. But none of them knew the truth. No one knew the truth. Except him. She stopped at the base of the dais, close enough now to feel it. His power. It pressed against her skin like invisible weight. Dominant, suffocating, undeniable. The air itself felt heavier under his gaze. Slowly, deliberately. She lifted her eyes to meet his, and instantly regretted it. Because he wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He was watching her. Like he'd been waiting. Like he'd found something. A flicker of something dangerous passed through his expression. Something unreadable. Something that made her pulse stutter. Recognition. Her blood ran cold. No. That's not possible. He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way a predator studies something pretending not to be prey. You've been quite convincing, he said softly. The words were quiet, but they landed like thunder. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Confusion. Shock. But she heard something else, something beneath the words. I know what you are. Her throat went dry. Every carefully constructed lie, every calculated move, every second she had spent pretending, shattered in that single moment. He knew. The Alpha King took one slow step forward, then another. closing the distance between them until there was nothing left to hide behind. No crowd, no illusion, no safety. Just him. And her. His voice dropped to something only she could hear. "Tell me," he murmured, eyes locking onto hers with terrifying precision. "How long did you think you could fool me, Ksa, mate?" The last word lingered, not as a claim, but as a challenge. Her breath hitched. Time seemed to fracture, because in that moment, there was only one truth left standing. He had known. Maybe from the beginning. Maybe from the very first lie. And now, there was nowhere left to run. "So let me ask you something. If pretending to be someone else was the only way to survive, but getting caught meant facing someone like him, would you still take the risk? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to see what you'd do. And if you're already feeling the tension building, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious how far this story is reaching because this is only the beginning. The forest was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that warned you something had already gone wrong. Branches cracked under her boots as she ran, breath tearing through her chest in ragged bursts. The moon hung low and swollen above the treetops, casting silver light across the ground like a blade drawn across skin. Behind her, nothing. No footsteps, no howls, no pursuit. And that was exactly what made it worse. She didn't slow down, didn't dare, because she knew better than anyone. Silence didn't mean safety. It meant they were watching. 3 nights earlier. The same forest had been alive with sound, laughter, fire, voices she trusted. Now, ash, smoke, and bodies that hadn't been there before. She remembered the smell first. Burnt pine, blood, and something darker. Something wrong. She had arrived too late. Again. And her pack, if you could even call them that, had never been strong. Rogues, drifters, wolves without territory or protection, the kind of people the great packs pretended didn't exist, but they had been hers. And now they were gone. Not killed in battle. Not taken by rivals. Erased. Clean. Efficient. Like someone had made sure no one would come looking. But she did. She always did. That was her curse. "You shouldn't be here." The voice had come from behind her. Calm, steady, completely unafraid. She hadn't turned immediately. "Neither should you," she replied, eyes scanning the ruins. A pause. Then, "Fair enough." When she finally turned, she saw him leaning against a blackened tree, arms crossed like he had all the time in the world. He didn't look like a warrior. No armor, no visible weapons. Just dark clothing and a gaze far too sharp for someone standing in the aftermath of a massacre. "You're late," he added. Her jaw tightened. "You're alive." "Clearly." "Then you saw what happened." His eyes flicked briefly across the burned clearing before returning to her. "I saw enough." "Not good enough," she snapped. "Who did this?" Another pause. Longer this time, measured, like he was deciding something. "That depends," he said slowly, "on how much you're willing to risk to find out." Her fingers curled at her sides. "I don't deal in riddles." "No," he said quietly. "You deal in survival." That made her still, because he wasn't guessing. He knew. "Careful," she warned. But he only pushed off the tree, stepping closer. Close enough for her to see the faint scar cutting through his brow, and the kind earned in fights that didn't end clean. "You want answers," he continued. "I'm offering you a path to them." "And the price?" His lips twitched. Almost a smile. "Everything." That was how it started. Not with trust. Not with hope. But with a choice. A dangerous one. "You've heard the rumors," he said as they moved deeper into the forest, away from the ruins. "I don't listen to rumors." "You should." Some of them are true. She didn't respond. Didn't need to. He continued anyway. The Alpha King's territory has been expanding. That's what kings do. Not like this. Something in his tone made her glance at him. Entire rogue settlements, he said. Vanishing. No survivors. No traces. Her stomach twisted. You're saying he did this? I'm saying his borders grow wherever the disappearances happen. That's not proof. No, he agreed. It's a pattern. They walked in silence for a few moments. Then, there's more, he added. Of course there is. He stopped, turned to face her fully. There are whispers, he said quietly, about what he's really looking for. She crossed her arms. Let me guess. Power. Something older than that. Now she was listening. Forbidden bloodlines, he said. Ones that were supposed to be wiped out generations ago. Her pulse skipped. Stories, she said. Maybe. But people don't erase entire settlements over stories. He held her gaze. No, he said softly. They erase them over threats. She should have walked away. Any sane person would have. The Alpha King wasn't just powerful. He was untouchable. A ruler whose name alone kept rival packs in check. A man who didn't negotiate, didn't forgive, and, if the rumors were to be believed, didn't hesitate to kill his own mate. You're asking me to walk into his territory, she said flatly. I'm asking you to walk into his court. That's worse. Probably. And you think I'll just what? Knock on his gates and ask questions? A flicker of something amused passed through his expression. No, he said. You're going to do something much smarter than that. She didn't like the sound of that. Rogues don't get audiences with kings, she said. Not rogues, he corrected. Then what? He held her gaze for a long second, then said it. You're going to be his mate. The silence that followed was deafening. She stared at him, then laughed. Once. Sharp. Disbelieving. That's your plan? It's not a plan, he said calmly. It's the only plan. You've lost your mind. Have I? Yes. He tilted his head slightly. You know how rare true mate bonds are, he said, especially for someone like him. Her expression hardened. And? And that makes it the perfect cover. No one would question it, he continued. Not the guards, not the council, not even him, at least, not at first. She took a step closer, voice low and dangerous. You're suggesting I lie to the most powerful alpha in existence, pretend to be something sacred, something that can't be faked. I'm suggesting you survive long enough to find the truth. And when he finds out? His gaze didn't waver. You make sure that doesn't happen. She should have said no, should have turned around, walked away. I disappeared into the forest like she always did. But then, she saw it again. The burned clearing, the bodies, the silence where voices used to be. And something inside her hardened. What's your name? She asked suddenly. He hesitated then. Call me Kyle. Not your real name. No. Figures. And yours? She didn't answer immediately. Names had power. Names made things real. I don't have one that matters, she said finally. Kale studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good, he said. You won't need it where you're going. The preparation was brutal. Not physically. Worse. She had to learn how to become someone else. How does a mate walk? Kyle asked one night as they trained. She frowned. Like a person? No, he said. Like someone who belongs. He circled her slowly. Confidence? He continued. Not arrogance. You don't challenge an alpha king, you compliment him. She rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous. Is it? Yes. Then you're already dead. That shut her up. Days turned into nights. Nights into something sharper. more focused. He taught her everything she needed to know: how to hold eye contact just long enough, how to lower her gaze without looking submissive, how to speak in a room full of power without sounding like she was begging for it. But the hardest part was the bond. "You don't just say you're his mate," Kale said. "You make them feel it." "And how exactly do I fake something like that?" He stepped closer, too close. "Conviction," he said quietly. Her pulse quickened. "You believe it," he continued, "even if it's a lie." The gates of the Alpha King's territory were taller than she expected. Black iron, guarded, impenetrable, or at least, they were supposed to be. "Last chance," Kale said beside her. "To what?" "To walk away." She stared at the gates, then at the guards. Then she stepped forward. "I don't walk away," she said. The moment everything changed wasn't when she entered the territory. It wasn't when the guards stopped her, or when they demanded answers. It wasn't even when she said the words, "I'm here to claim what's mine." It was later, much later, when she finally stood before him for the first time, the Alpha King. He had been sitting when she entered, relaxed, almost bored, like nothing in the world could surprise him anymore. Then she spoke, and everything shifted. Silence. Heavy. Watching. Waiting. And then he stood, slowly, deliberately, power rolling off him in waves that made the air feel thinner, harder to breathe, his eyes locked onto hers. Dark. Endless. Dangerous. And for a split second, something flickered there. Something sharp. Something knowing. Gone as quickly as it appeared. But she saw it. Felt it. Deep in her bones. "You're late," he said. The same words Kale had used, but they didn't sound the same coming from him. From the Alpha King. They sounded like a warning. And that was the moment she realized something terrifying. This wasn't going to be a simple deception. This wasn't a game she could control. Because from the very beginning, from the very first second their eyes met, it felt like he already knew. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to watch her. Enough to wait. Enough to let her walk straight into his world. And see how long she could survive inside it. And now, standing in that grand hall again, with his voice still echoing in her ears, she understood the truth she had been trying to ignore. This was never just her mission. Never just her lie. It was his game too. And she had been playing it. From the very start. The palace didn't welcome her. It absorbed her. From the moment she crossed the threshold, it felt less like entering a place and more like stepping into something alive, something aware, something that watched as closely as the people inside it. The air itself carried weight, thick with expectation and quiet judgment, pressing against her lungs with every breath she took. Nothing here was accidental. Not the placement of the guards along the corridors, each standing too still to be relaxed, but too casual to appear threatening. Not the way servants moved silently, their eyes lowered yet somehow always noticing. Not even the light, filtered through towering windows in a way that cast long, shifting shadows across polished floors. It was a place built on control, on hierarchy, on power that didn't need to announce itself because it was understood in every glance, every silence, every carefully measured step. And at the center of it all was him. She felt it constantly, his presence, even when he wasn't in the room. It lingered in the way conversations stopped when she entered, in the way doors opened just before she reached them, in the way nothing in this palace ever seemed out of place. She was being watched. Not just by guards or servants or the council members who pretended not to stare. By him. Always by him. It started subtly. A servant pausing a fraction too long when handing her a cup, as if memorizing her face. A guard shifting position when she passed, not to block her path but to remind her it could be blocked. Whispers that died the second she turned her head, replaced by polite smiles that never reached the eyes. "That's her," she heard once, faint but clear enough. "The one who claims—" The rest had been swallowed by silence, but she didn't need to hear it. She already knew what they were saying. She could feel it in the way they looked at her. Not with belief, not with acceptance. With curiosity, with doubt, with the kind of interest reserved for something that didn't quite belong but hadn't yet been removed. It should have shaken her. Maybe it did. Somewhere beneath the surface. But she didn't show it. She couldn't. Every step she took, every word she spoke, every glance she allowed herself to give, it all had to be controlled, calculated, perfect. Because one mistake here wasn't just embarrassment, it was exposure. And exposure meant death. Still, it wasn't the guards or the servants or even the whispers that unsettled her the most. It was the silence around him. The Alpha King didn't hover, didn't demand her presence, didn't question her openly. Days passed without him summoning her, without any direct confrontation, and somehow that was worse, because it meant he was waiting, watching, letting the tension build until it became something suffocating, something impossible to ignore. And then, when she least expected it, he would appear. The first time it happened, she almost gave herself away. She had been walking through one of the inner corridors, the kind lined with tall windows and heavy drapes that muted the outside world into something distant and unreal. Her thoughts had been elsewhere, replaying every interaction she'd had since arriving, every look, every word, searching for cracks in her performance. She didn't hear him approach, didn't sense him the way she should have. One moment she was alone, the next. "You're adapting quickly." His voice came from behind her, low and smooth, close enough to send a sharp jolt through her spine. She turned too fast. Just slightly. But enough that she felt it. That slip, that moment of lost control. He noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. He stood a few steps away, hands loosely clasped behind his back, posture relaxed in a way that only made him more intimidating. He like a predator that didn't need to tense to be dangerous. His gaze settled on her, steady and unreadable, and for a second the world seemed to narrow down to just that, his eyes on hers, searching, dissecting. "I learn quickly," she replied, forcing her voice to remain even. A pause. Then, a faint tilt of his head. "So I've seen." It wasn't a compliment, it wasn't anything, just an observation, but the way he said it made it feel like something else entirely, like there were layers beneath the words she couldn't quite reach. He stepped closer. Not enough to invade her space, just enough to make her aware of it. "Tell me," he continued, his tone almost conversational, "what do you remember?" Her pulse skipped. About what? About me. The question was simple, too simple, and that was what made it dangerous. She had prepared for this, expected it, but standing there, with his gaze fixed on her, it felt different, sharper, more real. "Enough," she said carefully. "Enough is vague. Then maybe I prefer vague." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Convenient. She held his gaze. Didn't look away. Couldn't afford to. "Truth doesn't always come in perfect detail," she said. "Not when it's been lost." Another pause. Longer this time. His eyes didn't leave hers, didn't soften, didn't harden. Just stayed there, steady and unrelenting. And then, he nodded. Once. "Interesting," he murmured, and just like that, he stepped back. The pressure lifted. Slightly. Not gone. Never gone. But enough that she could breathe again. He turned as if the conversation had already ended. We'll see how much you remember, he added over his shoulder, when it matters. And then he was gone, leaving behind silence and a single, terrifying realization. This wasn't interrogation, it was a game. And he was enjoying it. The days that followed only made it clearer. Every interaction with him was layered, deliberate, designed to push without ever fully confronting. He would ask questions that sounded casual but weren't. Stand just close enough to unsettle but never enough to cross a line. Watch her reactions with a patience that felt almost inhuman, as if he had all the time in the world to wait for her to slip. And slowly, dangerously, something else began to build beneath the tension. Something she hadn't planned for. Something she couldn't control. Because for all his calculated distance, for all his quiet intensity, there were moments, brief, fleeting, where something else surfaced. A shift in his gaze, a pause in his words, a closeness that felt different. Not softer, never soft, but less guarded. And that was more dangerous than anything else, because it made her hesitate, made her question, made her feel something she couldn't afford to feel. Fear she could handle. Suspicion she expected. But this pull, this strange, undeniable awareness every time he was near, it complicated everything. It blurred lines that needed to stay sharp. And the palace saw it. Or at least, it saw enough. The banquet was proof of that. It was the kind of event designed to display power without ever stating it outright. Long tables draped in dark silk, lined with silver and crystal that caught the light in sharp, glittering edges. Nobles dressed in colors that signified rank, status, allegiance. Every seat placed with intention, every glance measured, every word chosen carefully. She felt it the moment she entered, the shift in attention, subtle but undeniable. Conversations slowed, eyes turned, not openly, never openly, but enough, always enough. She moved through it all with practiced ease, her posture steady, her expression composed, every step calculated to project belonging. Not arrogance, not submission, something in between, something that said she wasn't a threat, but also not to be dismissed. It worked. Mostly. Until it didn't. You've caused quite a stir. The voice came from her left, smooth and edged with something that wasn't quite friendly. She turned to find a woman watching her expression pleasant but her eyes sharp. Too sharp. Have I? She replied lightly. Don't pretend you don't notice, the woman said, stepping closer. It's almost insulting. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. People are curious, she added. About you, about your claim. There it was. Not direct, not outright, but clear enough. A test. One of many. Curiosity isn't a crime, she said calmly. No, the woman agreed. But deception is. The words hung between them, quiet and deliberate. A challenge wrapped in politeness. She didn't react. Didn't flinch. Then it's a good thing I'm not deceiving anyone, she said. The woman studied her for a long moment, then smiled. This time, it reached her eyes, but not in a comforting way. We'll see, she murmured. And just like that, she turned away, melting back into the crowd as if the conversation had never happened, but it had, and it meant something. Because this wasn't just about her anymore, it was about power, each about position, about who stood where in a system built on dominance and control, and she was standing somewhere she wasn't supposed to be, which meant she had enemies, even if they hadn't fully revealed themselves yet. The rest of the night only confirmed it. Conversations that sounded polite but carried hidden barbs, glances that lingered just a second too long, laughter that felt forced, like it was covering something sharper underneath. And through it all, him, the Alpha King, watching, always watching. He didn't stay at her side, didn't claim her attention, but she felt his gaze, cutting through the room, finding her no matter where she stood. And when he finally approached, everything else faded. "You're handling them well," he said quietly, appearing at her side as if he had always been there. "Am I? For now." She glanced at him. "That doesn't sound reassuring. It's not meant to be." His eyes flicked toward the crowd, then back to her. "They're testing you. I noticed. And? And I'm still here." A pause. Then, something shifted in his expression. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but she saw it. "Yes," he said softly. "You are." The way he said it made her pulse quicken, like it meant more than just her presence in the room, like it meant something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. And then, he leaned closer, just enough that his voice dropped, just enough that no one else could hear. "Be careful," he murmured. "Not all threats announce themselves." Her breath caught. "Is that a warning?" "Consider it advice." And then he stepped away, leaving her with more questions than answers, and the growing, undeniable sense that she was already in deeper than she had planned. It was later that night, long after the banquet had ended, long after the palace had quieted into something that felt almost peaceful, that she found it. Or maybe it found her. She hadn't meant to wander that far, hadn't meant to stray from the familiar corridors into the older parts of the palace, where the walls seemed thicker, the air colder, the silence heavier. But something pulled her. A feeling, an instinct, the kind that had kept her alive for as long as it had. She followed it, down a narrow hallway, past doors that looked untouched for years, until she reached one that didn't belong. It was subtle, almost nothing, but enough. The handle was different, the wood slightly worn in a way the others weren't. Used. Recently. She hesitated, listened. Nothing. And then, slowly, she pushed it open. The room beyond was small, dark, empty. Or at least, it seemed that way at first. Until she stepped inside. Until she saw it. The mark. Carved into the far wall. Faint. Almost hidden, but unmistakable. Her breath caught. Because she had seen it before. Not here. Not in this palace. But in the ashes of what used to be her world. And in that moment, everything shifted. Because this wasn't just about her lie anymore. This wasn't just about survival. This was something bigger, something deeper, something buried beneath layers of power and silence and carefully constructed control. A conspiracy. And she had just found her first real piece of it. The mark on the wall wasn't just familiar, it was impossible. She stood frozen in the dim, suffocating quiet of the hidden room, her fingers hovering inches from the carved symbol as if touching it might make it vanish. But it didn't. The same curved lines, the same jagged break running through the center like something had tried to split it apart. She had seen it burned into the ground of her destroyed settlement, scorched into the remains of trees, etched into the very last place her people had stood. And now it was here, inside the Alpha King's palace, hidden, not displayed like a banner of conquest, but buried like a secret someone didn't want found. That alone changed everything. Because if the Alpha King had truly been responsible for the massacres, if he had wiped out rogue settlements as the rumors claimed, why hide the mark? Why not display it as proof of dominance, as a warning to others? No, this wasn't a signature left behind by a conqueror. It was something else, something quieter, something careful. A message, maybe, or a warning. Her pulse quickened as her mind began to piece together fragments she hadn't fully understood before. The patterns Cale had mentioned, the disappearances, the expansion of territory that seemed too precise, too clean. It had always felt wrong, but she had accepted it because it fit the narrative she had been given. The Alpha King as the villain, the ruthless ruler eliminating threats to strengthen his reign. It was simple, too simple. And now, standing in a hidden room inside his own palace, staring at a mark that tied directly to the destruction she had witnessed, she realized just how dangerous simple explanations could be. Because simple explanations were often lies. A faint sound in the corridor snapped her back to the present. Footsteps. Distant, but approaching. Instinct took over. She stepped back, her eyes scanning the room quickly, memorizing every detail in seconds. The placement of the mark, the faint scratches along the walls, the way the floor dipped slightly near the far corner as if something had been moved there before. There was more here. There had to be. But not now. Not with someone coming. She slipped out of the room, closing the door just enough to make it look undisturbed, and moved silently down the corridor, her steps light, controlled, practiced. By the time the guard rounded the corner, she was already gone. That night, sleep didn't come. It never really did anymore, but this time it wasn't just tension keeping her awake. It was clarity. Dangerous. Eye-sharp clarity that cut through everything she thought she knew and left behind something far more complicated. The Alpha King might not be the enemy. The thought should have been absurd, ridiculous. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Because the more she replayed her interactions with him, the more something didn't fit. He hadn't acted like a man hiding guilt. He hadn't avoided her questions or shut down conversations that came too close to sensitive territory. If anything, he had done the opposite. He had watched her, tested her, pushed her, but never in a way that suggested he was trying to hide something. It was as if he wanted her to look deeper, to question, to doubt. And that made him either incredibly confident or not the one responsible at all, which left a far more dangerous possibility. Someone else was behind it. Someone inside the palace. Someone with enough power to orchestrate disappearances, manipulate narratives, and, if the rumors were true, tamper with something as sacred and rare as the mate bond itself. The idea sent a chill through her. Because if that was true, then this wasn't just about territory or dominance. This was something bigger. Something that reached into the very foundation of their world, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The next night, she moved. The palace after dark was a different place entirely. The polished surfaces and carefully controlled movements of the day gave way to shadows and silence, the kind that pressed in from all sides and made every sound feel louder than it should. Guards still patrolled, but their patterns were more predictable, their vigilance slightly dulled by routine. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She had spent days observing, memorizing routes, timing movements, noting which corridors were watched more closely and which were left just vulnerable enough to slip through. It was a risk. Every step was a risk. But standing still was worse. She moved through the halls like she belonged there, her posture relaxed, her pace unhurried. Confidence was its own kind of disguise. People noticed hesitation. They questioned uncertainty. But certainty, even false certainty, often went unchallenged. It got her further than she expected. Past the main corridors, past the outer chambers, deeper into the palace where fewer people ventured and fewer questions were asked. But the deeper she went, the heavier the air became. Not physically, but something else. A feeling. Like the palace itself was watching her, aware of her presence in places she wasn't meant to be. She ignored it. Kept moving. Focused on the task. The mark wasn't an isolated clue. It couldn't be. If it was hidden in one place, it might be hidden in others. Patterns. That's what she needed. Connections. She found the second mark 2 nights later. smaller, fainter, carved into the underside of a stone ledge in an unused chamber. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, but she was. And once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. The same symbol, the same break, the same impossible connection between the palace and the destruction outside its walls. Her heart pounded as she traced the edges of it, her mind racing through possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. This wasn't random. It was intentional, structured. Someone was placing these marks. Someone who had access to restricted areas. Someone who knew how to move through the palace without drawing attention. Someone powerful. A sound behind her. Closer this time. Too close. She turned sharply, her body already shifting into readiness, every instinct screaming at her to move, to hide, to disappear before she was seen. But she didn't get the chance. You're starting to develop a habit. His voice cut through the silence, low and unmistakable. Her breath caught. She turned slowly. He stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame as if he had all the time in the world, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked onto her with that same unsettling intensity. The Alpha King. Of course. Of course it was him. I could say the same about you, she replied, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the sudden spike in her pulse. He pushed off the doorframe and stepped inside, his gaze flicking briefly to the mark on the stone before returning to her. Exploring restricted areas in the middle of the night isn't exactly encouraged, he said. Neither is appearing without warning, she countered. A faint hint of amusement touched his expression. And yet, here we both are. Silence settled between them, heavy and charged. He took another step closer, not threatening, not aggressive, but enough to make her acutely aware of the distance between them. Or lack of it. What did you find? He asked. The question was simple, direct, and completely impossible to answer honestly. Not yet. Not when she didn't know where he stood in all of this. Nothing, she said. His gaze didn't waver. That's not true. Her jaw tightened. Then why ask? A pause. Then, he tilted his head slightly, studying her in that same way he always did, like she was a puzzle he had already started solving. Because I'm curious which version of the truth you'll choose to give me, he said quietly. The words hit harder than they should have, because they weren't just about the mark. They were about everything. Her lie, her identity, her presence in his world. He knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to keep pushing. Enough to keep watching. Enough to make this entire situation feel like something far more complicated than a simple game of deception. You assume I'm lying, she said. I assume you're hiding something, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. His voice dropped slightly, his gaze sharpening. Lies are intentional. Secrets are situational. She held his gaze, refusing to look away, even as something shifted beneath the surface, something she didn't fully understand. And which one do you think this is? She asked. Another pause. Longer, this time. Then, that, he said softly, is what I'm trying to figure out. The tension between them tightened, stretching thin, fragile, like something that could snap at any moment. And for a second, just a second, she considered it. Telling him, dropping the lie, admitting why she was really here, what she had seen, what she was starting to suspect. Because if he wasn't the enemy, if he was being manipulated the same way she was, then maybe he was the one person who could actually help her uncover the truth. But trust wasn't something she gave easily. And this was too big, too dangerous, too uncertain to gamble on a feeling she couldn't even name. He took another step closer, close enough now that she could feel the heat of his presence, the steady, controlled power that radiated from him without effort. "You should be careful," he said quietly. "You've said that before. And you ignored it before. Maybe I don't take advice well. Or maybe," he said, his voice lowering further, "you don't realize how much danger you're actually in." Her breath caught. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. Not as a threat, as a warning. Genuine. Real. And that changed something. Because it meant he knew. Not everything, but enough to be concerned. Enough to be involved. Enough to be part of this in a way she hadn't fully understood before. "Then tell me," she said, her voice quieter now, more measured. "What exactly am I in danger from?" His gaze held hers for a long moment. Then, something shifted. Subtle. But there. A hesitation. The first real crack she had seen in his composure. And then, "That," he said slowly, "depends on who you've already drawn attention from." The answer wasn't what she expected. It wasn't clear. It wasn't direct. But it was enough. Enough to confirm what she had started to suspect. This wasn't just about him. It never was. And whatever was happening inside this palace, whatever force was moving beneath the surface, leaving marks in hidden places and erasing entire settlements, it was watching her too. The realization settled heavily in her chest, sharp and undeniable. She wasn't just investigating anymore. She was being pulled into something much larger than herself. Something that didn't just involve power or politics or even survival. Something that reached deeper, into loyalty, into trust, into the very bonds that defined who they were. And standing there, just inches away from him, caught between truth and deception, between instinct and uncertainty, she understood something that made her pulse race for an entirely different reason. This wasn't a simple choice anymore. It wasn't just about whether she could keep lying. It was about who she could trust. And right now, she didn't know if he was protecting her or hunting her. The betrayal didn't feel like a moment at first. It felt like silence behaving differently. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but occupied. Like something had just left the room and taken all the air with it. She noticed it in the smallest details. The way conversations in the servant corridors stopped half a second too early when she passed. The way a guard didn't meet her eyes but tightened his grip on his spear, as if confirming something he already knew. The way doors that used to open for her without question now hesitated before unlocking. It wasn't open hostility. It was confirmation. Quiet, collective confirmation. Something had changed overnight, and she hadn't been told what. She felt it first in the servant who had always been too kind. The woman who brought her water in the evenings without being asked, who lingered just long enough to exchange small, harmless words. That morning, the servant didn't look at her, didn't smile, didn't even slow down as she placed the tray on the table. Her hands were shaking, not dramatically, barely visible, but enough. Enough to mean something. "You didn't sleep," the protagonist said softly, trying to keep her voice steady, casual. The servant froze for a fraction of a second too long, then forced a nod. "It's been busy in the palace," she replied, too quickly, too rehearsed, and then she left. No hesitation, no warmth, just distance. That was the first crack. The second came an hour later when two council guards entered the corridor outside her quarters and didn't announce themselves. They didn't come inside. They didn't need to. They stood there like they were waiting for something to confirm itself. Watching. Listening. And then, one of them said it. Quietly. Like it wasn't meant for her ears, but ensured she heard it anyway. "It's her," he muttered. "The rogue. The false mate." Her blood didn't freeze immediately. It sank. Slowly. Like something heavy settling in water. Because that word, false, meant it wasn't suspicion anymore. It was conclusion. Someone had decided, and that meant the game had moved past hiding. She didn't run. Running would confirm everything. Instead, she did what survival had taught her to do better than anything else. She moved forward, calm, controlled. She stepped into the corridor, letting the door close softly behind her. The guards turned immediately, not surprised, expecting. "Explain," she said evenly. The taller one stepped forward slightly. "You're to come with us." That wasn't an explanation. Silence. The second guard shifted his weight. "The Alpha King has requested your presence." Requested, not commanded. That detail mattered. Her mind locked onto it instantly, because in this palace words were never accidental. She followed them. Not because she wanted to, because refusing would end everything immediately, and whatever was happening here wasn't finished yet. The walk through the palace felt different now. The air wasn't just heavy, it was aligned, as if the entire structure had agreed on a version of reality she had not been included in. Doors closed too slowly behind her. Eyes followed too openly. Even the servants she passed no longer pretended not to notice her. It was no longer subtle. It was containment. When they reached the throne chamber, the guards stopped. Not inside. Outside. A boundary. A stage line. One of them opened the door, and the sound that followed was not dramatic. It was worse. It was controlled. The kind of quiet that existed only when something irreversible was already in motion. The Alpha King stood at the far end of the chamber, not seated, not relaxed. Waiting, but not impatiently. Patiently. Like someone who had already accounted for every possible outcome. And beside him, her breath caught just slightly, was the servant. The one who brought her water. The one who avoided her gaze this morning. Now standing rigid, pale, trembling. Not out of fear of punishment, out of guilt. That was when she understood. Before a single word was spoken, she understood. The servant looked at her once. Just once. And that was enough to break it open. "I'm sorry," the servant whispered. The words barely carried, but they didn't need to. The truth followed immediately. "She is not what she claims to be," the servant said louder now. Voice shaking but firming with each syllable like someone forcing themselves to finish something already begun. "She is not the Alpha's mate. She entered the palace under false identity. She is a rogue." The chamber didn't react like she expected. There was no gasp, no sudden outrage, no chaos. Instead, there was stillness. As if the room had already known and was simply waiting for confirmation. Her mind worked quickly, too quickly. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. This wasn't panic exposure, it was timed, coordinated. Someone had waited until she was deep enough inside the palace that escape wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. Her gaze shifted instinctively to the Alpha King. Expecting anger. Expecting the shift she had been preparing for since the beginning. Punishment, execution, judgment. Instead, she found something else. He wasn't looking at the servant. He wasn't looking at the guards. He was looking at her. Calm. Completely calm. And that calmness was worse than rage, because it meant he had already decided what this moment was. "You may leave," he said quietly, not to her, to everyone else. The guards hesitated. The servant didn't move. "Now," he added, and they obeyed. Not because they wanted to, because they always did. The doors closed behind them with a heavy finality that made the room feel smaller, more contained. Just the two of them now. The Alpha King stepped forward, slowly, not threatening, not aggressive, just deliberate. She didn't move. "I suppose," she said carefully, "this is where you kill me." He stopped a few feet away, studied her for a moment. Then something unexpected happened. He exhaled. Not frustration, not anger. Something closer to release. No, he said. Her mind paused. No? She repeated. If I intended to kill you, he said calmly, you would not have been allowed to walk this far inside my palace. The words landed with quiet precision. She searched his face for deception. Found none. So what is this? She asked. Justice? A faint, almost unreadable shift crossed his expression. Control, he said. Information and confirmation. That last word made her still. Confirmation. Not accusation, not surprise. Confirmation. She took a careful step back. You knew, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. From the beginning, he replied. The world didn't tilt. It sharpened. Then why let me stay? His gaze didn't move. Because you weren't the threat. Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Dense. You think I'm lying? She said slowly. I think, he corrected. You were placed here. That hit differently. Not accusation of identity. Accusation of positioning, of manipulation, of design. By who? She asked. That, he said quietly, is what you were helping me find. Everything shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but structurally, like a foundation being revealed beneath a floor she had been standing on the entire time. You used me, she said. Yes. No hesitation, no apology, just truth. You let me believe I was deceiving you, she continued. Yes. You watched me lie. Yes. Her fists clenched. And you did nothing. Something flickered in his eyes then. Not guilt. Calculation. Incorrect, he said. I did everything necessary. That sentence changed the air again. You think I am the enemy? She said. No, he replied. I think you were the door. That metaphor didn't make sense. Not yet. But it was intentional. He was leading her somewhere. The real enemy, he continued, does not attack kingdoms directly. They reshape them from within. Quietly. Patiently. He stepped closer again, but this time she didn't retreat. Not because she trusted him, but because she needed to understand. The council, she said slowly. Part of it, he confirmed. Not all. A rival alpha? Possibly. Or someone inside your circle. A pause. Then. Yes. That was the first real confirmation of scope. Not a single antagonist. A network. A structure. A system. And she had been inside it without knowing. Your identity being exposed, he said, was not a failure. It was timing. Timing for what? He looked at her for a long moment. For this conversation. That made her pause, because it implied something worse. That even this betrayal, the servant, the exposure, the containment, had been anticipated. Or worse. Allowed. She studied him carefully. So what now? She asked. Now, he said, you decide whether you continue believing you are the prey, or accept that you were already inside the hunt. A beat of silence, then. And if I refuse? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped slightly to the side, revealing something behind him on the table she hadn't noticed before. A map. Marked. Multiple regions circled. Lines connecting disappearances. Symbols matching the one she had found in the hidden room. Her breath slowed. You already know I won't refuse, she said quietly. No, he replied. I know you understand what refusing costs. That was the moment the alliance formed. Not with trust, not with agreement, but with recognition. Because the truth was no longer theoretical. It was visible, structured, real. We find them, she said slowly. We expose them, he corrected. She glanced at him. And the servant? Already handled, he said simply. No emotion, just outcome. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. The plan began there. Not as partnership, as necessity. He explained the structure in fragments, how influence had been seeded through council ranks, how disappearances weren't random but directional, how the mate bond itself had been tested, observed, possibly manipulated through ancient rites long thought abandoned. Every piece made the picture worse and clearer. She added what she knew: the marks, I'm the settlements, the patterns only visible if you had lived through the destruction instead of reading reports about it. Slowly, something formed between them. Not trust, alignment. Two perspectives converging on the same unseen target. We draw them out, she said finally. Yes, he agreed. We make them believe they are still in control. She looked at him then. Really looked. And if they're not just in your council? A pause. Then we burn the structure until we find where the rot begins. The words were calm, not emotional, not dramatic, just final. And for the first time since entering this palace, she understood something clearly. She was no longer inside enemy territory pretending to survive. She was inside a war that had already started long before she arrived. And now, she was no longer alone in it. The night of the convergence was never meant to be peaceful. The entire kingdom gathered beneath the obsidian spires of the Great Hall, where banners of every allied territory hung in heavy silence, swaying slightly as if even the fabric itself was uneasy. It was a ceremonial summit, one meant to celebrate unity between pacts, councils, and bloodlines. But tonight, unity was a lie stretched thin over something rotting underneath. She stood at the edge of the hall beside the Alpha King, feeling it before anything else happened. The tension wasn't spoken. It was structural. Conversations were too controlled, laughter too careful, eyes too watchful. Every seat at the high table represented influence, and every influence represented a fracture in the system she had spent weeks unraveling. Now, all those fractures were in one place, waiting. You feel it too, he said quietly beside her, not looking at her, his gaze fixed on the crowd. They know something is wrong, she replied. They've always known, he said. That was when the first shift happened. Not dramatic, not immediate. One of the council elders rose slowly, tapping his glass with deliberate precision. The sound cut through the hall like a signal. Conversations stopped. Every head turned. Before we proceed with the rites, the elder began, voice smooth but edged with something brittle underneath. There are matters that require clarification. A pause followed. A carefully constructed pause. She felt the trap before it fully formed. We have reason to believe, the elder continued, that there has been a deception within the royal circle. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not panic, recognition. As if this moment had been anticipated. She felt eyes shift toward her instantly. The Alpha King didn't move. Step forward, the elder said. Not to her, to him. And he did. Calmly. Without hesitation. The Alpha King walked into the center of the hall, his presence cutting through the room like gravity itself had changed direction. He stopped beneath the highest banner and turned slowly to face them all. Speak, he said. The elder hesitated for the first time, just a fraction. Then steadied himself. We have uncovered evidence, he said, that your so-called mate is not who she claims to be. The hall erupted in controlled murmurs. Controlled, because fear still governed them. The elder continued, emboldened by the reaction. A rogue infiltrated this palace under false identity. She has manipulated proximity to the throne, gained access to restricted knowledge, and... Enough. The Alpha King's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The single word collapsed the noise instantly. Silence returned like a chain snapping into place. He turned his head slightly. Not toward the elder, toward the room. You believe this is revelation, he said calmly. It is confirmation. Confusion flickered across faces. That wasn't the reaction they expected. Not anger, not denial. Confirmation. The elder frowned. You admit it? I have never denied it, the Alpha King replied. That shifted the room again, because if he had known, then the narrative they had built no longer held. The Alpha King stepped forward another pace. What you call deception, he continued, I call infiltration of a controlled variable. Her breath caught slightly. Controlled variable. He was reframing everything. She entered my territory under false identity, he said, his gaze sweeping the hall, and I allowed it. Gasps this time, real ones. You allowed it? Someone whispered. Yes, he said simply. Because the real threat does not announce itself at the gates. The elder's expression tightened. You would endanger your own kingdom for speculation? The Alpha King finally looked directly at him. No, he said quietly. I would use it to expose you. A shift. A visible one. Guards along the walls straightened. Not in defense of the council, but uncertainty. That uncertainty mattered more than loyalty. The Alpha King raised one hand slightly, and the doors at the far end of the hall opened. Not suddenly, not violently, deliberately. And in walked the evidence, records, witnesses, confessions. Each escorted under guard, each placed in view of the entire hall. The conspiracy didn't collapse. It unraveled, piece by piece. Names were spoken, transactions revealed, signals decoded, alliances exposed. The council elder took a step back. This is fabricated, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. No, the Alpha King replied. This is what you built while believing no one was watching. Then he turned slightly. And while you were watching her? The attention shifted to her again. But this time, it was different. Not accusation. Recognition. She stepped forward before she fully realized she was moving. The hall watched her, waiting for her to be defined again. Rogue, liar, infiltrator, fake mate. She stopped beside him. Not behind, not below. Beside. They want to know what I am, she said quietly. The Alpha King didn't look at her. Then tell them. Silence stretched. This was the final fracture point, the moment everything either collapsed or reformed. She looked out at the assembled court, at the people who had judged her without knowing her, at the system that had tried to categorize her as either threat or tool. And she chose differently. I am not your weapon, she said. I am not your lie. A pause. And I am not your mistake to correct. The hall held its breath. Then she turned slightly toward the Alpha King. I came here to survive, she said quietly, but I stayed because the truth mattered more than survival. That landed heavier than any accusation. The Alpha King finally looked at her then, fully, and something in his expression softened, but not into weakness, into clarity. The council is dissolved, he said suddenly. The words hit like impact. Shock rippled through the hall. Effective immediately, he continued, authority is restructured under direct crown oversight until full purge is complete. A coup in declaration, clean, absolute, no room for negotiation. Guards shifted. Some stepped forward, some stepped back. Loyalties fractured in real time. The elder tried to speak again, but no sound came, because power had already moved away from him. The Alpha King turned slightly toward her. You were right, he said quietly, so only she could hear. About what? She asked. That this was never about one lie. A pause. It was about who gets to decide what truth survives. The hall was still unraveling behind them, but in that moment, it felt distant. Secondary. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "You can leave now," he said, and her breath slowed. "Or you can stay." She looked at him. Really looked. Not as an enemy. Not as a monarch. But as someone who had stood in the same darkness she had and chosen a different kind of survival. "Stay as what?" she asked quietly. A pause. The faintest shift in his expression. "As yourself," he said. Not mate. Not imposter. Not weapon. Herself. That choice hit harder than any threat had, because it wasn't binding. It wasn't forced. It was open. Dangerous in a different way. She turned slightly toward the collapsing council behind them, the system she had infiltrated, survived, and helped dismantle. Then back to him. "And you?" she asked. "What do I become in this?" His gaze didn't waver. "Whatever you choose to stand beside." The silence that followed wasn't tension anymore. It was transition. The end of one structure. And the beginning of another. The hall behind them continued to fracture into chaos and resolution, but where they stood, there was stillness. Not peace. Not yet. But possibility. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not your mate," she said. He nodded once. "I know. And I'm not your subject. I know that too." A pause. Then, "Good," she said quietly. "Because I don't want to be either." Something like respect passed between them. Not romantic resolution, not final closure. Something more uncertain. More real. He stepped slightly aside, offering her the space to choose direction. "Then choose," he said. She looked out at the hall one last time, at the broken system, at the exposed truth, at the future that no longer had a script written for her. And she chose to stay. Not because she belonged, but because she no longer needed permission to exist there. The Alpha King watched her for a long moment, then turned back to the hall as order began to reassemble itself from the ruins of deception. And in that quiet aftermath, as power shifted and old loyalties burned away, she understood the final truth. She had entered this palace as a lie meant to survive long enough to escape, but she was leaving it as something else entirely. Something forged in truth, not definition. His voice broke the silence beside her one last time, softer now, almost unreadable. "So what does that make you?" he asked. She didn't look at him when she answered. "Someone who stopped being afraid of the truth." And as the hall reshaped itself around them, one final question lingered, not spoken aloud, but left hanging in the air like a challenge to anyone still listening. If a lie led you to the truth, does it still make you a fraud? Or something more?